Hi, and welcome back to NTV7's 2015 budget program with me, Amy Ghani. For those of you who are just joining us, we just heard Prime Minister Datuk Sri Najib Tun Razak wrap up the 2015 budget announcement. Joining me now in the studio is our panel of experts, Taxon's Executive Director Kang Beng Ho, as well as Ng Yin Sin, Senior Vice President of the Asian Strategic and Leadership Institute, or ASLI. Thanks so much for being here today. We're happy to have you. Welcome to the show. All right, so without wasting any time, time and again, the government has reiterated its commitment in strengthening its fiscal position. And it said that it wanted to garner higher revenue vis-a-vis the GST. So, a lot of people were expecting further clarity of the GST, so the amended list of exempted items really came as not much of a surprise. So, Kang, my question for you is that, we just saw the 20-cent fuel price adjustment recently, and coupled with this impending GST, do you think that this is going to serve as a double whammy, and how do you think businesses in particular will be able to cope with the higher costs?
I think what the Prime Minister has done is, if you listen to the speech carefully, RON 95 is going to be amongst one of the items which is exempt from GST. That was one of the big questions which the public were asking. RON 95, now that it's exempt, that will not impact the consumer. But what is not clear is whether it's really exempt. He used the word relief, whether that's exemption or whether that's zero rated. Because from the business point of view, somebody who's buying gasoline for the business, that will be an important factor.
But taking a step back, what exactly is the difference between the zero rated and the exempt items?
The exempt item benefits the consumer. He or she will not be paying the GST. The zero-rated item benefits the supplier, someone who is in business, because of the zero rating. Whatever input tax or GST is embedded in the products, the purchases he makes will be refunded to him.
All right, so the government has talked a lot about wanting to cushion the impact of the GST. So we see this cash assistance that were given out. Yin Sin, do you think that these measures are sufficient? And also, what is going to be the net impact? Because on the one hand, we have the government trying to reduce its spending, and then on the other, we have all these cash assistance that are being, carried out. So what is your take on this charge?
You see, GST is coming in. Subsidy rationalization must happen, and then we see an across-the-board price increase, and therefore that leads us to the rising cost of living. But that doesn't necessarily increase our standard of living. So if you look at Malaysia as an upper middle class country, upper middle income country, whereby Malaysia is progressing, most of the population is pretty much literate, have been to university, and then we have a pretty large middle income segment within the community. And with this increase in all sorts of prices, and even though Mr. Kang has said that RON 95, even though there will be relief on it, but we are still not sure whether it's completely being exempted or just being relieved to a certain extent. But what we as consumer will see is an across-the-board increase in almost everything, because a reduction of subsidy and an increase in 6% sales tax, GST, even though it's not exactly an increase because SST will be taken away, will be replacing with GST. Mm-hmm. But what we will be seeing in the market is a sudden spike in consumer prices across the board. And therefore, it is going to be a double whammy for the consumer. And then the government will be giving out up to 950 BRIM money to a certain target group of a certain population of people. However, what I'm going to say is that for people like us, the working professionals, mostly below the age of 45, we are neither here nor there. We are not poor enough to receive help from the government, nor are we rich enough or privileged enough to receive all the goodies announced just in the budget. So what my concern is what's going to happen to the middle income earners, especially urban dwellers like myself.
Right.
That we are neither here nor there.
Okay, yeah. So that's a good topic that we can dwell on in a bit. But before that, just as a last question on GST. So Kang, I know you're a tax expert and I'm sure you've done a lot of analysis and assessments on the GST. What do you think is going to be the overall impact of this new tax system on, government, the debt standing, on inflation, and on overall economic growth?
In terms of government revenue, you can see from there, the additional revenue is 5.2 billion, and he's going to give 4.9 billion away.
And this is a net revenue.
That is a net after the getting rid of the sales tax and service tax. The net revenue of 5.2 billion, and he's going to give 4.9 billion through BRIM. So there's actually is a revenue neutral tax at this stage. So GST will be meaningful in the future because that's a good mechanism to make good the shortfall of government revenue, but not right now.
So it's more on the longer term measures.
Can I also add on to something based on regarding GST and also personal income tax? What we are looking is that out of the 29 million Malaysian population today, we are looking at 12 million workforce. And out of the 12 million workforce, we are only looking at about roughly 1.7 million people paying taxes. With GST, a broad-based tax, I would say that it is a fairer system because the more you consume, the more you pay.
Right.
Of course, there will be certain quarters who are saying that why can't we make the rich people pay more? But what is the percentage of richer people who are already paying at the topmost bracket today?
Right.
I mean, in terms of income tax. And do you think it is fair for a society, for a country to tax on this top tier percentage of people, let me plug a figure from the sky. Let's say 10% of the Malaysian population are paying income tax at the topmost tier level. So is it fair for 10% to subsidize across the board for the rest or for the remaining of the 90% of the population?
So this would be taxes like the Buffett tax or
Yes.
inheritance taxes,
Yes.
and it still remains a question. All right, so let's move on to the middle income group topic. So, there's rising discontent from this particular segment of society. If you look at the full spectrum, on the one hand, you have the lower income earners who are impacted by the government measures, but they have support from the government, have the cash transfers and such. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have the high income earners, people with higher disposable income and a larger pool of savings. So they're hit, but they have sufficient buffers in place. And then you have the middle income earners who, they play a large role in the GST sector. They're large consumers of, they go to outlets and retail outlets, hyper outlets and such. And they're also biggest contributors of the income tax. So is there anything else that you have seen in this recently announced budget that addresses the concerns from this particular pocket of society?
Well, there is a personal tax rate reduction
by 1 to 3 percentage
from 1
points.
to 3%, and I think the marginal rates have dropped from 26 to 25. So that does help that group of people. But when you really talk about middle income group, are they really middle income? Because if you look at income equality, Malaysia's Gini coefficient, Gini coefficient is a factor that measures inequality. Malaysia's Gini coefficient is the third highest in Asia. That means we have the greatest gap of the rich and the poor. The rich are very rich, and the poor is very poor. So if you take the average, it looks good. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't address the problem. All these problems are, when you talk about middle income, and you're talking about someone earning $7,000 a month, but in the scheme of things, that doesn't go very far, as you quite rightly say, because everything is going up. Can a person like that own a house? The house prices are probably beyond their means without financial help from their families. So that's the problem today.
Right.
Unless we can raise our income, growth in terms of income, as well as distribution of income, that's not going to help the social position of the country.
Right. And Yinsin, what are your thoughts on this?
I also think that if Mr. Kang talked about distribution of wealth and then growth of income, my personal perspective is that yes, Malaysia, if we look at the corporate sector, we are among, Malaysian corporate sector are among the lowest paying in the region compared to many other countries. But we must also always reflect back towards our own productivity and efficiency, whether our human capital and our workforce are actually capable or efficient enough to back that amount of money, like for example, like Hong Kong and Singapore. Same graduates from the same universities get paid maybe 40% more compared to us. And with Malaysia moving up the value chain, hopefully towards a higher income, towards a developed nation status and high income nation, and compare that to what we bring home, our take-home pay and our disposable income. Of course, there's a gap today. But again, Malaysians being Malaysians, our corporate sector and the majority at large are so addictive towards cheap labor. And with a huge influx of foreign workers, cheap foreign migrant workers in Malaysia, and corporate sector not willing to exactly pay and compensate people based on their value, it's going to be very difficult for Malaysian job market and our salary to grow together with our value.
Right, so it remains a challenge for
It's
our
going to be a
economy,
challenge
no
for a long
doubt.
time. Yeah.
All right, so let's move on. In the budget, we just heard the Prime Minister announce a half-month bonus for civil servants. And there has been a lot of chatter from QPEX in recent months. They've expressed interest for the government to raise its civil servant minimum salary of 800 ringgit. So to a certain extent, their wishes were fulfilled. But Yintin, I want to ask you a very fundamental question. Do bonuses, do they actually improve productivity?
Bonuses and in fact promotions will not improve productivity if at the core level the people are not productive. I think what the government, just like all organizations, if the company is not making money, tell me what gives the employees the right to demand for bonuses at year end. So the same goes for government. Emoluments already take up about 1/3 of our national budget.
Yep, 23% last year, in fact.
And much of that goes to salaries. So if the country is not doing exactly well economically, and if the administration, the leaders are looking at balancing the budget, yes, 500 in today's monetary term really is not going to take us anywhere. But again, 500 to over 1.5 million public servants, that's going to be a large amount of money. Going back to what you said, yes, we have a very fat civil service. People may not exactly be the most productive of the whole lot, but if the government do not incentivize them with something, people will get more demotivated. But on the other hand, by giving people 500 ringgit, that also will not guarantee or garner more productivity or efficiency within the system. So it's going to be a chicken and egg issue, whether we increase the productivity first or we promote and incentivize people first.
Right. And Kang, do you think that these bonuses would have a negative impact on the fiscal consolidation measures?
I think it's not so much the bonus. I think it's the huge bureaucracy, the civil service, which is taking up a big segment of the government resources expenditure. It's a huge chunk.
So you do believe that the civil service is in fact bloated and should be
It is
trimmed
bloated.
down?
So it's not so much the salary which causes the problem. It's the size of the civil service. I think we've got probably the largest civil service.
Can I also add on a note here? In many countries, civil service does not include the teachers and the healthcare workers. But in Malaysia, we include the doctors, the nurses, and the teachers, and that takes up a lot of the headcount already. So that's also a point that we need to note. Yeah.
All right. So let's move on from there. Something, also a structural issue. A lot of analysts and researchers out there have stipulated that one of the key challenges for the prosperity of the Malaysian economy going forward lies in producing quality human capital. So things like improving access to education and training, as well as education and training delivery systems. Do you see any progress in this in regards to the recently announced budget? Maybe Kang, you can start off.
Well, there are a few things that, in the budget. One is for developing talents and also for startups.